Welcome to another episode of the Capital Playbook. My name is Charles Williams. I am the owner and managing member of Pioneer Realty Capital, and we are so thankful that you are joining our show today. We're going to talk about a very interesting subject. We're going to dig deep a little bit into retail, what it takes to acquire a retail property, what it takes to make that property function well in terms of generating income for the investors who have invested in that property. To help us do that, we brought in some talent for folks that have a lot of years of experience doing this, Mr. Calvin Wong and also Mr. Daniel Ng. Thank you for being on the show, guys.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yep.
Yeah, we're definitely happy to have you. Before we get into our discussion today, we do want to encourage you to like, share, and subscribe to our platform. Yeah, be sure and do that. Thumbs up. This way, we can continue to bring in guests that are here to educate you. And I can guarantee today you're going to feel like you've been educated, because we're going to talk about some key things in retail ownership that you perhaps may not have heard or may not know. And so, again, thank you and welcome to our show. Calvin, let me first start with you. Tell us a little bit about your background, your professional background. How did you get started?
Yeah, so I get asked a lot on that because after college, I just, jumped right in commercial real estate. I know a lot of people, they dabble into residential and then transition to commercial. I'm very fortunate to be, get that opportunity. I work for Goldman Sachs in Dallas after college in the real estate department. So we have a fund called Whitehall Fund. It was at that time about $2 billion. So I started as an analyst. I look at basically all the deals that came across my desk, make suggestion proposal to our investment committee. Why is this a good deal? Why should we go buy this property? So through that, I was there for 7 years, and that's where I picked up all my skills, analytical skills, climbing the corporate ladder.
Right.
And then also during that time, I enrolled in the CCIM courses. So it's a designation. CCIM stands for Certified Commercial Investment Member. Mm-hmm. So it's similar to CPA to accounting world, CFA to the financial industry. CCIM is like the gold standard for commercial real estate investment. And I went to that class, and that's where I met my business partner, Daniel Ng. Back in
I don't know, good or bad.
Back in 2008. And since then, we've been talking about, different things, about growing, about partnership, and, giving back to the community. Because there's a void in kind of like what you're doing is the education piece about, how to invest in commercial real estate. Where do we start? So we feel like our community has the same need, and that's where in 2012, I quit Goldman to partner with Daniel. He's also, community. He's always giving back to the community, and I feel like it's a good fit to kind of help our community invest in commercial real estate, gain wealth through investing in commercial real estate.
Well, very good. That's an excellent story. So you started with Goldman right out of college. Mm-hmm. What did you study? Finance in college?
Yeah, so I got a bachelor, double major in finance and economics.
In economics, okay. Mm-hmm. So you were set up for banking the whole way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you got to Goldman, and then you're making progress there. You're climbing that corporate ladder. Then you meet Daniel, and Daniel, I know he's pretty persuasive, but next thing you know, you're quitting your job and you're becoming his partner, right?
Yeah.
Different type of ladder. We put a ladder on the roof to check out properties.
There you go.
Still climbing.
Right. So Daniel, tell us about your background. How did you get started?
Well, real estate family. Family was in the commercial real estate already, so I kind of grew up in that.
Okay.
I went to college in Switzerland. I studied banking and finance.
Okay.
And after college in 2001, I came back to the family business first to, acquire more properties, manage the properties. And then, 08 hit. Mm-hmm. And at that time, my father had a major stroke. So I only had a good 5 years with him to kind of learn the business. And at that time, you had to surround yourself with people who are wanting to grow. So I had a friend, George Tang Hongs with Lee & Associates. Now, at that time, we said, hey, let's get our CCIM. and because the market was pretty bad 2008,
Right.
as you know, and that's how I met Calvin. And just from there, just continue to network with more people, build upon yourself. Education is important.
Right.
I truly believe in that. And from there, when Calvin gave me a call, he said, "Hey, let's brainstorm a couple of ideas," and that's what we did. And at that time, I didn't have a business partner. And I said this would be great. My brother and I will handle the family assets, but on the brokerage side, on the syndicating side, on the just growing, I need that other that other person.
Right.
And Calvin has been that fit. We've been partners over
10 years now.
10 plus years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So no arguments, and everything's been good. It's not easy finding a good business partner.
Yeah, it's like finding a good partner in anything. It's
So yeah, and just from there, we just acquire properties, help investors, syndicate deals. We manage the properties that we syndicate as well, so we have a management team as well. My wife was also from Goldman, and that's how I met my wife.
Okay.
Through Calvin, and she was doing the investment accounting, the real estate accounting over there. So she handles all the assets as well. But from there, just continue to grow. I think we have over 100 people in our team, and just growing that as well. So it's a new venture that we started a year ago with another platform, but it's been good.
Okay, well, good deal. So, so we're going to talk about retail, the acquiring of retail. Now, there are various types of retail properties in that under that retail umbrella. What are the various types of retail? And then tell us about what you guys focus on, and then we'll dig into why you think that's a good target for you. But we'll kind of go through some of the various types of retail properties someone could acquire.
Sure. Yeah, like you said, retail is a very broad term. It could, there's different categories below that retail category. So you have the big box power center where you kind of like, there's like Whole Foods. I mean, those are grocery anchor center. You have the big box, and then you have the junior anchor inline space that kind of feeds off the foot traffic because, everyone needs grocery. So all these retailers in the inline space, they kind of feed off that traffic. That includes like, nail salon, barbershop, coffee, services. So those are like, your power center, your grocery anchor center. And then you have the freestanding retail building. So that includes your fast casual restaurants like Chipotle or Chick-fil-A. So basically one building is one tenant. So
single tenant building.
Single tenant, freestanding building. And then you also have the strip centers, which is there's no anchor tenant. Basically, everyone's just kind of like more like providing neighborhood services. For instance, like a local mom and pop coffee shop, dentist, barber shop. Basically, just provide service to the surrounding neighborhood. So those are like what we call like a shopping strip center. So some of the retail strip centers, neighborhood strip centers, you see national credit tenant. A national credit tenant means they have locations across the U.S. or you have regional credit, meaning they are in a certain region, but they're well known. When you look at the brand name, you recognize that brand name. So you have a mix of perhaps 1 to 2 tenants that are national credit or regional credit tenant. Subway or Jimmy John's, and then the rest is just local mom and pop. So that's a very typical strip centers settings. So those are the 3 main categories of retail.
And so now of that, which have you primarily found it as your target when you're acquiring retail centers? Are you on the power center side, or are you on the inline tenant, or is it a mix? What do you guys typically do?
Yeah, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, typically, we've purchased mostly inline centers. We do have some single tenant, triple net deals as well. And also depending on the investors, the different investor groups have different criteria, right? There are some that want power centers. So depending on the capital that's coming in, or sometimes they're doing a 1031 exchange, right? They sold a property in their market and they want to exchange in this market. But for us, Calvin and I, we've been looking at a lot of these smaller inline centers, 20,000 square feet, some are 30,000 square feet. And, having that mixture of local tenant and national credit tenants. So with COVID and all that, I think we've been pushing a lot of the local businesses. We really believe in entrepreneurs locally trying to, strive, because we said, we see Amazon, all these other companies that are disrupting the retail business. So these businesses have to adapt. So you just have a lot of services, nails, hair salon, things like that. In the future, there might be these type of food trucks that are bringing nail salon services. I heard about that the other day.
Really?
So, but these are people who are just being creative, and which we need in the U.S. We need people who to become creative. I don't like to say the word disruptor, but I think we need, in this country, we need to be more creative. And at the same time, as business owners, entrepreneurs, we need to also adapt, as times have changed.
Yeah. So now, when you go and you're looking to acquire, let's say you've acquired a new retail center, and because you mentioned that you guys are opportunistic, you'll take a transitioning asset that perhaps is not stabilized, and you'll go in and make an effort to clean it up, put lipstick on it, as we said. But now it's time to start bringing in your tenants.
Yes.
What thought do you give into creating your tenant mix? Is that, or are you just the type of investor that buys a property and says, hey, whoever can pay the rent, you're here? Yeah. Or do you take time to create structure and design what that tenant mix is going to be, so that they kind of all feed off each other, and they're all, you have this group of services being offered at your facility that's going to really drive traffic? What approach do you guys typically take?
So when we acquire, a value add property like that, the first thing that we usually do is lighting. So I go with new LED lights. I try to, spruce, do some painting, some things cosmetic that's not too inexpensive, because those are all triple net stuff, items that we improve. Calvin can kind of talk about the strategy.
So there's the term called tenancy mix.
Okay.
It is very important for retail owners or landlords, because like you said, you don't want just to have any concept that can pay rent to come in, because it may not bring in the right, demographics to your centers or whatnot. So really, a successful or well curated strategy from landlord is one of the things is like to be patient, because if you have some vacancy in your property, yes, you have the sense of urgency trying to lease it out as soon as, because you have a loan payment.
It's costing you money, right?
Right. But a lot of time you want to make sure the use. So for example, in the strip centers, let's say if you have a martial arts or a music academy in your center, guess what? Your demographics is mostly family and, not to say soccer mom, but you get the idea.
Yeah, right.
And it's probably not a good idea to put in, like, let's say, a tattoo shop or whatnot, right? Because, not to, but
what's wrong with my tattoo?
Maybe that's a bad example, but you get the idea.
No, you because what you're doing is you're creating that mix, and we can see your tattoo on our after hours show. If you really want to show it to us, we'll let you show it to us. But that makes a good point, because especially if you're looking to get into owning retail, you really have to think about what your mix of tenants are going to be. And that example of having the music studio, where people are going to bring their kids to learn music, next to a tattoo shop. That's a different element. And it might work, but it could also affect other tenants. who may decide to come in there. So you really have to think about it. So as you go into these, you already have in mind what you want your tenant mix to look like in general. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we usually go with, because a lot of time, a tenant that will stay for long term or have their business flourish is they need all this co-tenancy to help them. So that's why as owners, you got to have a strategy to figure out what will make sense to help each other.
Yeah, you got to drive that traffic.
Mm-hmm. You got to make sure for example, if there's dry cleaners, yeah, it makes sense to have, maybe a nail salon, or because when people drop off their clothes or whatnot, they can go and get other services, or even, a coffee shop or restaurant, they can spend more time in the center doing multiple things. Also, if there's a martial arts studios, guess what? When the parents drop off their kids, either they drive away to go to somewhere else or Starbucks, or if you have a right tenant, then the parents can go directly next to it and hang out, or chill, or eat something or drink something, things like that.
Yeah, it makes sense. So a mom drops the kids off for martial arts or for piano lessons, and then she goes and gets her nails done.
Exactly.
While she doesn't have to leave the center, or go back home. So so it makes a lot of sense. Now, I know that on the finance side, there was a time, probably 10 years ago, certainly before COVID hit, where a lot of the capital was targeted toward those power centers, those national credit tenants. But what we found, is that when things change, they're the first to leave. they really don't care about breaking your lease. What's been your experience in terms, or your preference when you're trying to tenant your properties? Are you looking for those national credit tenants? Or are you looking for those service oriented tenants that kind of will survive the disruption of your Amazons and some of your other things that have disrupted retail? What's been your target here?
And talk about some of those centers.
Yeah, I mean, being, looking at the national credit tenant, like you said, because some will go bankruptcy, file bankruptcy, or some just break the lease because it's, there's not a personal guarantee to it. So they just close because they close, 500 stores nationwide. Even though your store is doing well, it's just someone from corporate says, hey, we need to close, and it's the numbers. But for our, I think from our local entrepreneurs, their goal is, that's their bread and butter. And they have to adapt to, survive, because they're not going to go get a job. Right. So we saw it during the pandemic, they had to adapt. If people weren't doing online sales, or if they're in the restaurant business, they weren't doing a lot to go, well, they had to ramp up their to go. They had to adapt. So, I really believe in the local entrepreneurs still, even if they buy a franchise, right? They're still branding, but they're still locally, and they're guaranteeing the lease. That's the stuff I like to see, because they're also investing capital. Of course, landlords, they invest as well. So they do a TI. So it's not like a partnership. Right. So I look at the tenants as like our partners, because we're investing money into their space, or giving them, a better deal. Whatever it is, we're also investing. And then they're investing in their business, and, hopefully we create that win-win situation. But yeah, I mean, anything you want to add?
Well, so there's, like I said earlier, you have three major types. Depending on the capital, a lot of time with power center or big grocery anchor center, they are investing or owned by big private equity or even REITs, and they have certain guidelines on who they can put it in, because otherwise they don't want to get in default, because whenever they get their the loan, there's certain criteria that they cannot put on certain use or things like that. I've seen it, so that's just from. But fortunately, we are playing in a different game. I mean, not game, but like, we have a different rules. It gives us a more flexibility from just like a, 10, 20,000 square feet strip centers. Is more flexible. And because of that, if there's any shift in the market, we can really change quickly to adapt to it. Kind of like what Daniel mentioned. But again, landlord and tenant is really a true partnership. One cannot survive without the other, right?
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Well, let's just kind of go through a scenario from another perspective, because I know there are some who may not be in a position to buy a retail center, but maybe they want to lease. And there's a lot people don't know what it takes to occupy a space. Now you walk into these spaces, they have lighting, they're well decorated, all the things that are there. Is the landlord paying for all that?
So in retail, most of the leases are what we call triple net leases.
Well, we're not talking about the lease. I'm talking about when you go in and you have that design of the space. Who's paying for the design of the space?
The space that they want to rent?
Yeah.
It's the tenant.
Yeah. So let's go through a scenario, because a lot of people don't understand this. When they go to rent a space, a tenant has certain responsibilities. When they lease, they got to pay the lease. That's part of the cost, right? Yeah. And then before they occupy the space, there's something else they're going to come up with. What is that?
Renovation, TI.
Tenant improvements. Now, I know there in some cases a landlord may provide the TI and then build it into the rent. But it's typical in these smaller 10 to 20,000 square foot retail centers where that tenant is generally going to do it, right?
Yep.
So the tenant has to be prepared not only to pay the rent, but they're going to also pay the tenant improvements. And what could that cost them, just in general?
So it depends on what you are planning to open. If, let's say, someone wants to open a restaurant, if that space is not a restaurant space, because you have to convert that retail space to a restaurant, kitchen, grease trap, all those kind of renovation, it could cost somewhere from $200,000, $300,000, or even more. If you want to put in a bar and all that, making it fancy, it can go up to $1 million, because some of the restaurants that they really want to create a environment luxury feel and whatnot. I mean, it costs, it can go up to $1 million. And of course, as a tenant, you will want to always have either a capital partners that can help, provide that funding, or your personal funds, or if you have a track record in business, you can always get a SBA loan to fund it.
Okay, absolutely. So you have to have money to pay the rent, money for your TI.
Show me the money.
Tenant improvements, and then in most cases, the day that they open, they're not going to have. If it's a restaurant, every seat's not going to be filled.
Marketing.
Yeah. So they have to market. They have to drive traffic to their location. So that's going to require some working capital. So just finding a place to rent, that's one small part of it.
It's just one step.
Yeah. And the rest of that is, where's the money going to come from to do your tenant improvements, to make the space the way you want it to be, and then the working capital that's going to allow you to get up to where you're stable, where you're making enough money to cover your rent.
Plus the construction delays.
And the construction delays could also be caused by the city, because you have to get permits. You got to get a certificate of occupancy. There are going to be certain guidelines. There are probably going to be parking requirements depending on what you have. So there's a lot that goes into renting a space. Now, as owners, understanding what's at stake, because once you sign that lease, that 5-year lease, you're kind of in a legally binding contract with this individual for 5 years. Even if they stop paying rent, you still got costs that can result from that.
Yes.
And it could disrupt your business for a number of years if you chose the wrong tenant. So what is your process for evaluating prospective tenants who want to come into your space?
So, a lot of, even when we're representing tenants or as a landlord ourselves, when we were evaluating, is do they have a business plan? Have they, what's their capital? Do they understand the true cost? And do they have their contractor in place? Because if they're viewing a space and they don't have a GC, and it's like, okay, well, you're going to be spending $200,000. Don't you think you need to have experts to tell you, what it's going to be?
What's going to work? And a GC who has connections with the city.
Correct.
And that cannot be understated. You go hire your cousin's uncle, first cousin, baby daddy to be your GC, and nobody in the city knows him, right? But we know from our experience.
In the state of Texas, a GC doesn't need to be licensed.
It doesn't even have to be licensed. But why is it so important to make sure that general contractor has a connection with the city?
It's important. I know you've got
to pull the permits, and you got to eventually get that C of O.
Yes.
And no matter what you think, people do business with people. Okay, that's just how life is. A person can say, "Hey, that's unfair," but yeah, people do business with people. You want to do business with people who are connected in that city, so that you get your desired result or the most favorable result. But anyway, I interrupted you with that because you can tell I've had some personal experience with that. Yeah. But anyway, so what are you? So we were talking about what are you looking for in that prospective tenant who's going to come into your space? You mentioned the business plan, making sure they have a GC. What other things do you look for?
What are you looking for?
Yeah, so really their personal financial statement and a tax return. So a lot of time, if they couldn't produce those documents, it's probably we probably not able to qualify them because this is a serious stuff, like you said. If you want to sign a 5-year lease, from the landlord side, the landlord wants to make sure you are serious about this.
Right.
And if you just think like, if you just see somebody, they open a bar, they make so much money, and then you say, I can do it, I can go open. That's totally wrong because behind the scene, there's so much going on.
Yep.
And again, I see a lot of, there's a lot of business owners, successful business, but what they don't tell you is like, majority of them fail in the business.
Yep.
Small business owners, right? I think the ratio is like 20% will become successful, but 80% fail. Sometimes it's market, sometimes it's just their research or whatnot. But opening up a store is a serious business. It could cost all your savings if you do not do it right. So it's just to have a business plan. Basically, writing a business plan kind of train your brain, or basically find a reason to say no to what you're getting into. Because as you are preparing a business plan, when you're doing your projection, your forecast on income and expenses, it will kind of help you realize that, hey, maybe this business is not what I think it is. Maybe it doesn't generate the amount of income that I thought it is. Because once you sign a lease, you sign with the contractors, all the money starts flowing in and there's no turning back. So having a business plan actually train you, kind of like give you another hurdle to kind of see if this is what you need to go into, because it really takes a lot of money and the time to really open up a business.
Right.
So that's why we look for business plan. We look for your income tax, just so, because some of the properties that are financing, the bank will want to make sure that applicants have substantial net worth
in liquidity,
substantial net worth before. Otherwise, if we sign a lease, we could be in default, and they can call the loan.
Right. Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And so the lender, because your bank is going to have a stake in this as well, because they're heavily invested. They're going to have 75% of the value of that property is their debt. 65 to 70%. So they're technically are going to be owners
Right.
you know, of the majority of the deal. And so as a co-owner with the bank, if you're making bad decisions about the tenants, then, obviously they're going to do what it takes to protect their investment. And if that means getting rid of you and your tenants, they'll figure out a way to do that as well. But that is very interesting. And those are little things that people don't know. Now, as you're also looking at tenants that are coming into your space, what consideration do you give to the parking that's available? Because some tenants are going to require more parking in your lot, and some are going to require less in your lot. But there's a finite amount of space that's there. So what are you doing to make sure that these tenants are making sure they have access to parking so that they can have that traffic into their shop or their business?
So the city actually have a parking code.
Okay.
So in the shopping centers, let's say if you have a certain amount of parking space, they would look at the use of each tenant. General retail, most of the cities is one parking per 200 square feet. And with restaurant use, it's 1 per 100 square feet. So in other words, you need more parking for restaurant use. So before the city give you a CO, the city will look at, okay, what's already existing use? Do we have enough parking to put a restaurant use or another retail use? So that is, in some of the areas that is being redeveloped and whatnot, sometimes you can get kind of like grandfather and you can apply for a parking variance because that use has always been there for the longest time. But at that time, back then, the parking code is not what it is today because parking code changed. So in other words, as a landlord or owners, you kind of have to manage that as well. And also, that's also important when you go buy a property, because, for example, if you are looking at a shopping centers that is all retail use and the parking is already all accounted for. Let's say one of the retailer, maybe a clothing store, closed down. Without additional parking, you cannot lease that space to a restaurant. Even though as much as you want it, if you have a great location, it's not going to happen because you do not have enough parking. You don't qualify. You do not meet the parking code from the city. Yes, you can go through like parking variance and all that, but that's another topic. But usually when we buy a property or advise our client to buy a property, we'll look at the parking situation too, because we don't want the owner to have a limitation on what they can put in or cannot put in. Because as we all know, Amazon e-commerce kill a lot of business, like, your goods, guess what? All these shopping centers are being occupied by experienced restaurants and personal services. And those needs more parking. So that's something, the strategy as you guys, go acquire properties, just to remember if you want to re-tenant, make sure you have enough parking to accommodate that use.
Yeah, so it's a lot to think about.
It is.
From in terms of what you buy, where you buy it, what your tenant mix is, how you're going to drive traffic, the lighting, we didn't really get into security, and there's just so many things to think about when you're either buying a retail center or if you're going to be a tenant in a retail center. One of the things that really help people to learn about these topics is watch our show.
That's right.
Because we talk about this. And we could go on and on because there's so much you could know. But I'd love to have you guys come back. There are other subjects we would love to discuss. International investing, getting that international capital in to support some of your project. Talk about energy efficiency, because that's a big deal in helping drive down tenant costs, which perhaps will allow you to increase your rents. There's so many subjects and topics around this that we can discuss, but because of time, we're not going to discuss it today. But we do want you to come back, and we definitely want to get you guys back on the show so that we can touch some of those other topics. But thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
All
No,
right.
the main thing is to, provide value, educate the audience. I mean, you have been putting a lot of good shows and a lot of golden nuggets on your previous episode, but, continue what you do, because it really helps your audience kind of get the education to really get into like some advice on how to do things. I mean, this is very, very valuable.
Well, I appreciate that.
Well, we'll invite you to the metaverse.
I would love to be on the metaverse.
He teaches every month on the metaverse.
Well,
Yeah.
we'd love to be there. And you be sure to like, subscribe, and share. This is valuable information. You're not going to find it in the book. You can get your real estate license, but you're not going to learn this. So be sure and like, subscribe, and share, and we'll continue to bring you valuable content. Until then, we'll see you next time on the Capital Playbook.